These stories are designed for sleep. Good night. To understand any of this, you have to understand what my life was like before. I'm a musician. It's all I've ever wanted to be. All I've ever really been good at. I play guitar and I sing. My stuff is personal, acoustic mostly, songs about screwing up, about loving someone so much it feels like your ribs are going to crack open, about watching the sun come up after a night that felt like it would never end. You know, the usual angsty singer-songwriter fare. For years, that meant a life of ramen noodles, overdue bills, and the kind of soul-crushing day jobs that make you question every choice you've ever made. I've played to empty bars where the bartender was more interested in wiping down the counter than my music. I've played open mic nights where I was just background noise for drunken conversations. I've bussed tables and washed dishes, all while the calluses on my fingertips softened and the dream got a little bit dimmer. I was close to giving up, not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, sad way that people do when reality finally wins. I was thinking about selling my guitar, the one I'd had since I was 16. I was that close. Then I saw the flyer. It was tacked to a corkboard in the back of a dusty independent music shop. It was simple, printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock in a plain black font. No graphics, no flashy logos. Musician wanted, nightly performance, solo act preferred, inquire within. Below it was an address. It wasn't in the main entertainment district, but a few blocks over, in a part of downtown that was trying to be trendy, but hadn't quite gotten there yet. The kind of street with one artisanal coffee shop, a vintage clothing store, and a lot of empty storefronts. There was no name for the venue, no phone number, no website listed, just an address. It felt strange, unprofessional even, but I was desperate. The alternative was pawning my Martin, and that felt like cutting off a limb. So I went. The address led me to a heavy, unmarked black door set into a brick wall, tucked down a short flight of stairs from the sidewalk. A basement. I hesitated for a moment, the rational part of my brain telling me this was how you ended up in a news story. But the thought of that pawn shop ticket pushed me forward. I knocked. The man who opened the door was exactly the kind of person you'd expect to find behind a door like that. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a tailored but slightly dated black suit. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, and his skin had a pale, waxy quality like an old photograph. His eyes were the strangest part. They were dark and didn't seem to reflect the dim light from the street lamp above. He didn't smile. "You're here about the position," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my own voice suddenly feeling small. "Yeah, the flyer." He just stared at me for a moment, his gaze so intense it felt like he was weighing my soul. Then he stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in, play something." The inside was unexpected. I was expecting a dive bar, sticky floors, the smell of stale beer. But this was different. It was clean, meticulously so. The room was small and intimate, with dark wood paneling and a handful of small round tables, each with 2 simple chairs. A small, slightly raised stage was at the far end with a single stool and a microphone stand. The lighting was low and warm, coming from a small shaded lamps on the walls. It was classy, but also strangely silent. The air was still and heavy, and there was a complete absence of the usual background hum of a city establishment. No whirring coolers, no distant traffic, no chatter from a back room. He gestured to the stage. "The acoustics are excellent." I felt like I was in an audition I hadn't prepared for. I shakily unzipped my guitar case, pulled out my old Martin, and sat on the stool. My hands were cold and trembling. I didn't know what to play. A cover? An original? My mind was blank with anxiety. "Play something that matters," the gaunt man said from the shadows near the bar. So I did. I played the first song I ever wrote that I was truly proud of. It's a song about my dad, about the last conversation we had before he passed away. It's raw and it's painful, full of unresolved guilt and the kind of love that aches. I usually have to be in a certain headspace to play it, but standing there with this strange man's dark eyes on me, it just came out. I closed my eyes and let the music take over. I poured all the stress of the past few months, the fear of failure, the grief that still lived in a quiet corner of my heart, into the strings and my voice. The notes filled the silent room. When I sung the last line, my voice cracked with genuine emotion. The final chord hung in the air, vibrating, and then faded into absolute silence. I opened my eyes, my chest heaving, my vision a little blurry. The man was still standing by the bar, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable, and I started to think I'd completely blown it. "You'll do," he finally said. "The gig is yours if you want it. 7 nights a week, 10 p.m. to midnight. 2 sets. The pay is generous." He named a figure that made my jaw drop. It was more per week than I made in a month at my last dishwashing job. It was enough to cover rent, bills, food, and still have some left over. "I'll take it," I said, probably too quickly. "Good," he said. "Be here tomorrow at 9:30. We have a select clientele. They appreciate punctuality and passion." And that was it. I had the gig. The first week was a dream. I'd show up. The owner, who I still hadn't gotten a name from, He just seemed to materialize when needed, would nod at me, and I'd get on stage. The audience was always the same, about a dozen people scattered among the tables. They were a strange mix, a young couple that never spoke or touched, an old woman in a fur coat that, even though it was mild outside, a man in a crisp suit who looked like a banker. They'd file in silently just before 10 and sit down. They never ordered drinks. The bar was always unstaffed, a purely decorative piece of the room. And they were the most attentive audience I'd ever had. No phones, no talking, no coughing. They just watched. Their eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. It was unnerving at first, but I told myself they were just serious music lovers, true connoisseurs, and the pay was in my bank account every Monday morning like clockwork. I couldn't complain. The strangest thing, though, was the silence. After every song, no matter how much heart I poured into it, there was nothing. No applause, no whoops or cheers, just a deep, profound silence and a dozen pair of eyes staring out at me. Then, after a moment, I'd just start the next song. It was after one particular emotional set during my second week that I first noticed the other thing. I played a string of songs about a brutal breakup I'd gone through a year prior. I really dug deep, challenging all that remembered pain and betrayal into the performance. It was cathartic, like lancing a wound. When I finished, I felt utterly and completely empty. Not just tired, but hollowed out. I felt like I'd run a marathon. My hands were shaking and I felt dizzy. As I packed up my guitar, my eyes scanned the audience as they were silently filing out. And I saw it. Under the dim lights, they seemed to glow. A faint internal luminescence. A soft radiance that seemed to emanate from beneath their skin. Their faces, which were usually blank and pale, now had a touch of colour. They looked serene, satisfied, satiated. The old woman's wrinkles seemed softer. The banker's tense shoulders were relaxed. It was bizarre, and I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. The next night, I was still feeling the drain from the previous performance. I didn't have it in me to dredge up all that emotion again. I decided to just phone it in. I played a set of my more technically complex but emotionally shallow songs. I focused on hitting the notes perfectly, on my finger-picking technique, on keeping my voice steady. It was a competent performance, but it was hollow. There was no soul in it, and I felt fine afterward. A little tired from concentrating, but not the bone-deep exhaustion from the night before. But the audience, they were different. As I played, I could see them shifting in their seats. The banker's jaw clenched. The young couple seemed to be sitting even further apart. A low, almost inaudible hum of discontent seemed to fill the room. When my set was over, they got up and left pretty quickly, their faces looking pinched and disappointed. Their skin was as pale and dull as it was when they came in. The glow was gone. A pattern began to emerge. If I played with real, gut-wrenching, honest-to-God feeling, if I sang about loss or joy or heartbreak and meant every single word, I would end the night feeling like a husk. I'd go home and sleep for 10 hours and wake up feeling groggy and empty, and the audience would leave looking radiant, peaceful and full. If I played mechanically, focusing on technique and just going through the motions, I'd feel perfectly fine. But the audience would grow agitated. A few times, the owner would be standing in the back, his dark eyes fixed on me, his expression a clear, cold warning. This is where my rational mind started to break down. It made no sense. It was impossible. But it was happening every single night. The gig was paying my bills. It was digging me out of a financial hole I'd been in for years. But the cost was starting to feel too high. I started to dread going on stage. I started to look at my guitar as an instrument of my own depletion. I tried to find out more about the venue. I searched the address online. Nothing. No business registered. No reviews. No social media presence. It was a complete digital ghost. I searched for the owner, but I didn't even have a name to go on. He was just the gaunt man. My anxieties started to spiral. I wasn't sleeping well. I felt a constant, low-level exhaustion that no amount of coffee could fix. I felt faded. The world seemed less vibrant. My own emotions were muted, even when I wasn't performing. It was like the nightly drain was having a cumulative effect. One night, unable to sleep, I went down an internet rabbit hole. I started with generic searches like drain after performing and weird audience energy. I got a lot of new age articles about stage fright and managing your chi. It was all useless. On a whim, I tried a more specific, wider search, something like audience feeds on emotion. I clicked through pages and pages of results, mostly bad fiction and D&D forums, but then, buried deep on page 8 or 9 of the search results, I found a link to an old text-based forum. The design looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 90s. The forum was called something like Esoteric Realities and Unseen Phenomena. It was a hive of conspiracy theories, ghost stories, and what I assumed was paranoid delusion. But I was desperate, so I started reading. I used the forum clunky search function, typing in keywords like emotion, parasite, drain, audience, and then I found it. A thread from 6 years ago titled A Theory on Effective Predators. The original post was a long, rambling wall of text written by a user with a long since deactivated account. The user laid out a bizarre, terrifying theory. He wrote about the type of entity that lives among us, completely undetected. Vampires who didn't drink blood. They were something else. They fed on strong, raw human emotion. He called them feeling vampires, or empaths in reverse. The post claimed they couldn't generate their own emotional energy, so they had to harvest it from others. And the most potent, most nourishing source was the pure, unadulterated emotion generated through art, especially music. The post described how these creatures would create environments, feeding grounds, where they could passively absorb this energy from a performer. The performer would feel inexplicably drained, while the creatures would feel nourished, revitalized. The post ended with a chilling sentence. They want to eat your pain. I felt a cold dread wash over me. It was insane. It was the ravings of a lunatic on some forgotten corner of the internet. But it fit. It fit perfectly. The silent, attentive audience. The way they never applauded, because applause would break the circuit, dissipate the energy. The way I felt hollowed out after an emotional set. The glow. The goddamn glow. I had to test it. I had to know for sure. For the next week, I became a machine. I spent my days practicing scales, arpeggios, and complex chord progressions. I went on stage every night and performed with the emotional investment of a metronome. I played the saddest songs I knew with a completely blank heart, focusing only on the precise placement of my fingers and the pitch of my voice. I felt fantastic, energized even. The pay still came through, but the venue started to change. The audience dwindled. First the old woman stopped coming, then the banker. Soon there were only 4 or 5 of them left, and they looked awful. Their skin was sallow, their eyes were sunken. They looked like addicts going through a painful withdrawal. The faint, pleasant warmth of the room had been replaced by a painful chill. They stared at me with a new expression in their eyes. It was hunger. A desperate, angry hunger. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. I just finished my first solo set to the 4 remaining patrons. As I was taking a sip of water, the owner emerged from the shadows. He moved so quietly I didn't notice him until he was standing right beside the stage. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw an emotion on his face. It was cold, simmering anger. His voice when he spoke was dangerously quiet. "What is this?" he hissed. It's music, I said, my voice shaking. I'm playing the songs. You're playing notes, he corrected me, his dark eyes boring into mine. A sequence of sterile sounds. There is no feeling. There is no substance. He gestured with a skeletal hand towards the remaining patrons, who were watching us with rapt, desperate attention. They are hungry, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. This arrangement is contingent upon you providing what they need. Play with feeling, or you don't play at all. His words hung in the air, an undeniable confirmation of my worst fears. And I thought to myself, he was a keeper, a shepherd for his flock, and I was the trough. I went home that night in a state of pure terror. I couldn't quit. The money was too good. My savings were finally starting to build up. I was out of debt for the first time in my adult life. But I couldn't keep doing this. I felt like I was being eaten alive, piece by piece, night by night. I was trapped. My mind raced back to the forum. There had to be something else there. Some clue, some way out. I spent all of Friday on my laptop digging through the archives of that bizarre forum. I searched for hours, reading through countless stories of shadow people and alien abductions, feeling my hope dwindle. And then I found it. It was a reply to a different thread. A post from about 2 years ago by a user named Exit Stage Left. I know what you're talking about. I was in it. Not a bookstore. For me it was a jazz club. The same kind of deal. The quiet, discerning audience, great pay, and that feeling of being drained dry every night. They feed on you. I thought there was no way out. If you quit, they don't just let you go. The keeper makes sure you regret it. But I found a way. You have to negotiate an exit. They are creatures of transaction. You have to offer them a deal they can't refuse. One last big meal. A feast. Enough to satisfy them for a long time. In exchange for your freedom and a severance. A final payment. You have to make a deal with the keeper. A deal with the keeper. The idea was terrifying, but it was also the first glimmer of hope I'd had. A plan started to form in my mind, a desperate, high-stakes gamble. The next night, Saturday, I arrived early. The owner was there, polishing a glass behind the empty bar, a task I'd never seen him perform before. He looked up as I approached, his eyes cold and expectant. I need to talk to you, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. He just raised an eyebrow. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words tumbling out. Not like this, night after night. It's taking too much from me. That is the arrangement, he said flatly. I want to propose a new arrangement, I said, my voice gaining a slither of confidence. A final one. He stopped polishing the glass and gave me his full attention. I'm listening. One last performance, I said. Tomorrow night. But not just a regular performance. I will give you everything. I'll play one song, and I will pour every last drop of genuine feeling I have into it. All the pain, all the joy, all the regret, everything I have. It will be the most potent meal they have ever had. A feast, like you said. Enough to last them a long, long time. He watched me, and in exchange, you paid me a lump sum. I named a number. It was insane. Life-changing amount of money. Enough to disappear, to start over somewhere new, to never have to worry about rent again. And you let me walk away, clean break, no consequences. The deal is done. He went silent for a full minute. I could feel him weighing the offer, considering his hungry patrons. I saw a flicker of something in his dark eyes. Greed. Not for money, but for what I was offering. You believe you have that much to give? He asked, a hint of a sneer in his voice. I do, I said, thinking of all the hurt and loss I had stored away. For one song, I do. He finally gave a slow, deliberate nod. His lips pulled back into a thin, bloodless smile. Very well. One final performance. Give them a feast to remember. And we will conclude our business. I spent the next 24 hours in a daze. I didn't practice. I didn't even touch my guitar. I just sat in my small apartment, trying to prepare myself. I had to choose the song. I had to choose the memory. I needed the one that was the deepest, the most painful, the one that I kept locked away. It was the memory of my first love, of the brutal, soul-shattering way it ended. It was the wound that had never truly healed. That was the one. That was the meal. When I arrived at the venue on Sunday night, the air was thick with anticipation. The entire audience was there, all dozens of them, back in their usual seats. They looked gaunter and hungrier than ever before. Their eyes were fixed on the stage, on me. They knew. The keeper had told them what was coming. I walked to the stage, my legs feeling like lead. I sat on the stool and picked up my guitar. My hands were slick with sweat. I looked at the faces, pale, empty, waiting. They were a gallery of empty canvases, waiting for me to paint them with my soul. I met the keeper's eyes where he stood at the back. He gave me a single, sharp nod. It's time. I took a deep, shuddery breath. I closed my eyes and dredged it all up. The memory, his face, the sound of his laugh, the feeling of his hand in mine. Then, the betrayal, the lies, the final devastating conversation, the empty apartment, the years of ache that followed. I relived it. I let the pain flood me, raw and real, as if it were happening all over again. And then I began to play. The song poured out of me. My fingers fumbled on the strings. My voice cracked and broke, and tears streamed down my face. But it was real. It was the truest thing I had ever played. I sang a song of love and loss, of being shattered and trying to piece yourself back together. Every note was a shard of my own broken heart. I could feel it leaving me. It was a physical sensation, like bloodletting, a warm, vibrant energy flowing out of my chest, through my voice and my guitar, and into the silent, waiting room. I risked a glance at the audience. They were incandescent. The glow was back, 100 times brighter than before, and their faces, once blank, were now filled with a look of pure ecstasy. I felt myself getting lighter, emptier. The memories were still there, but their sharp, painful edges were being sanded down, consumed. The agony was fading, being replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. I was becoming a ghost at my own exorcism. I pushed on, my desperation a new kind of fuel. Just get to the end of the song. Just finish the deal. I thought of the money, of the freedom it would buy. I played the final heartbreaking chord. It rang out in the silent room, the last gasp of my pain. I let out a sob, a final hollow sound. It was over. I had given them everything. I waited for the silence to settle, for the feeling of release. I went to pull my hands away from the guitar, but they wouldn't move. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I tried again. My fingers remained pressed against the fretboard. My other hand was frozen over the strings. I looked down at them, my hands, but they didn't feel like my own anymore. They felt like foreign objects attached to my wrists. Then, my right hand started to move. It strummed a chord. My fingers on the fretboard shifted, forming a new one. My mouth opened, and a new verse began. A song I didn't know I knew. Words of a sorrow I hadn't yet felt. I was screaming on the inside. Stop. The deal is done. Stop. But my body wasn't listening. I looked out at the audience, my eyes wide with terror. They were still glowing, their ecstatic expressions unchanged. The feast wasn't over. They wanted more. The keeper, standing in the back, was smiling that thin, predatory smile. He had never intended to honor the deal. The deal was a trick to get me to open the floodgates completely. My body continued to play. It dredged up new feelings, new pains I had forgotten were even there. The grief for my father, the loneliness of my childhood, every failure, every insecurity, every dark thought I ever had. It was all being pulled out, converted into music, and served up to the silent, radiant entities in the chairs. I was being scraped clean. The emptiness inside me grew and grew until it was all that was left. I felt my consciousness begin to fray, the world turning grey and distant. The last thing I saw was the keeper's smiling face as the music finally stopped, and my empty body slumped off the stool and onto the floor. I woke up in a hospital bed. The sheets were white and sterile. The nurse with a kind face was checking on my IV drip. She told me I'd been found unconscious on the street by a sanitation worker a few blocks from my apartment. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, and malnutrition, the doctor said. They'd had me for 3 days. They asked me questions I couldn't answer. Who I was with, what I'd been doing. I just mumbled about overworking myself. They eventually let me go, handing me a pamphlet on managing stress. When I got back to my apartment, I checked my bank account online, more out of a numb sense of obligation than actual hope. My breath caught in my throat. The money was there. Every single penny I had asked for. My first thought was that it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by the stress and starvation. I had to be sure. I walked the 12 blocks to the address of the venue. There was no black door. There was no short flight of stairs. There was just a flat brick wall where it should have been, covered in old, faded graffiti, a seamless part of the building next to it. It had never been there. Shaking, I went back home and tried to find the forum. Esoteric realities and unseen phenomena. The link was dead. 404 not found. I searched for it, for the usernames, for the thread titles I remembered. Nothing. It was all gone. Wiped clean. I'm free. I'm rich. I never have to worry about money again. But the deal was fulfilled in a way I never imagined. They took the feast. They took it all. I went to my father's grave last week. I stood there, looking at his name carved in the stone, and I waited to feel the familiar ache of loss. Nothing. I remembered that I loved him. I remembered that I missed him. But the feelings themselves were gone. It was like reading a biography of a stranger. I put on my favorite record, the one that used to make me weep with its beauty. I felt nothing. I watched a comedy that used to make me laugh until my sides hurt. I felt nothing. I looked at my guitar, my old Martin, and I felt no love, no nostalgia. It's just an object made of wood and wire. They ate my pain, my ability to feel it. They ate my joy, my grief, my anger, my love. They took the artist and left the instrument. I'm a hollowed out shell, a ghost in my own life. I have all the money in the world, and all the time in the world to spend it. But I have no idea what to do with it, because there is nothing I want. Nothing brings me pleasure. Nothing brings me sorrow. There is only a quiet, grey, silent emptiness. The show is over, and I am what's left when the music stops. I looked at the sea, and it looked back into me. Salt from salt, water from water. Only one of us patient. Both of us unmeasurable. That was the first thing I scribbled into my journal when I arrived. I truly couldn't believe I had the job. Not because it was so sought after, but because it was so unlike me. 5 years before, I would have killed myself to know that I gave up a brilliant, busy New York for this remote island, rocky and almost empty. I always thought I'd get inspired by people to develop my book. But there's a certain drive you can only get from end-of-the-world locations like this one. The lighthouse did not rise from the island so much as it punctured it. a tall, slender silhouette gleaming white and sober. I remembered thinking it looked like a cutout in the dark clouds, like a column holding up the sky so it doesn't fall onto us. It stood at the highest point of the rock, bleached stone driven straight through the earth, as if something below had forced it upward. The cliff around it sloped away in jagged angles, but the tower remained perfectly vertical, unnervingly precise, indifferent to wind and erosion alike. At dawn, it blushed faintly gold. At dusk, it glowed like bone warmed by the last breath of the sun. The stone was smooth in most places, polished by salt and wind until it felt like cool marble beneath the hand. Subtle veins ran through it, faint spirals that drew the eye upward toward the lantern room, guiding your gaze without you realizing it. It had kind of grace, a vertical certainty that made the rest of the island feel accidental. The gallery railing curved in elegant ironwork, black against the white stone, fine and precise like ink against paper. The lantern room itself was encased in tall panes of glass, so clear they nearly vanished at certain angles. By day, the sky seemed to pass straight through it. By night, when the beam ignited, the entire crown of the tower transformed. Then the light unfolded into the sea's enormous and hostile mouth. It promised height, perspective, solitude without loneliness. The stairs inside spiraled gently upwards, worn smooth by decades of hands and boots. The air carried the faint scent of oil and salt, clean and orderly. From the lantern room, the view was endless. The sea spread outward in layers of blue and violet, calm beyond the outer rocks, the horizon dissolving into soft light. On a clear day, the locals had told me you can see the mountains of Rocky Ray. That was the name of the other island, hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. On my first day, I did see the mountains, a thin layer between the horizon and the sea. I was given a book of instructions by the old guy who'd hired me. My paycheck would come by mail. He said he didn't like to get complicated with any digital forms of payment, even though I believe that everyone has a bank account these days. I didn't mind. I was too absorbed by the lighthouse's beauty to even care. As you can see, I spent so much time trying to perfectly capture it in my journal. I will be completely honest and say that my first day was a little strange. As I was approaching the entrance at the base of the lighthouse, some guy passed right past me. I assumed some keeper they'd asked to stay temporarily, and almost knocked me down. I turned to look at this ragged man as he stumbled away. "Hey, you okay?" "He's a keeper." "The old one?" He didn't respond, just carried on with that peculiar walk. The next few days unfolded neatly. There is nothing worth noting about them apart from settling in and unpacking, establishing a routine, synchronizing my heartbeat with the waves, and discovering a newer kind of silence. Now that I think about it, there is something worth noting. I had found a logbook with various observations about the sea and descriptions of ships passing by. The very last sentence read, "There is always a bigger fish." I liked that. I made a little mental note to use that in my stories. This place was inspiring me more than I liked to admit. The island was small. Its population was of around 50 people, mostly fishermen, and some scientists studying anomalies in the magnetic field. I wasn't sure what that meant, but they let me know in advance that they would sometimes go up to the top of the lighthouse to observe. Another inhabitant was Lottie Waite. Lottie was a painter who loved to study landscapes. I'd see her sometimes on the beach. Everyone lived on the other side of the island though, almost as if they all had their backs turned on me. For the majority of the time, I was alone. Loneliness is tricky. It can make you see things. I sometimes thought I saw lights in the horizon calling me home. I described them in my journal as dancing ghosts. I guess I should truly start by describing the thing. At night, up in the lighthouse, the sea and the sky dissolved into each other. It was impossible to see anything else apart from black. Therefore, I first noticed the thing in the morning, when the blue hour sweetened the window frames and woke me up. There it was, in the waves, a dark spot, too small to be on a boat, yet moved slightly. I could not understand what it was, yet it invoked something in me. Fear, disgust, recall it. I could not understand it, so I feared it as it came from the clear horizon and threatened to disturb my peace. I wrote it in my journal as the days passed, and I noticed it was unfortunately approaching my shore. Something in the sea keeps getting closer. It took a while for it to reach me. Every morning, I would wake up and rush to the window to see if it had moved imperceptibly. I talked to Lottie about it. She was the only one who visited me from time to time, carrying her utensils and painting quietly on the beach. What could it be? I don't know. Maybe it's trash. It's too big. A piece of wood, maybe? It's too fluid for that. A dead animal? Yeah, maybe. I could tell that she didn't care at all, and that she just wanted to finish her painting. She'd been working on it for weeks, and she was nowhere near done. I don't understand why it's taking you so long. It's a beach. Yeah, but The horizon keeps changing. Oh, yeah, because of the mountains, yeah? It's not just the mountains, she responded. Some days, the sea seems to end sooner. What? I don't know, it's just confusing. That's why I like to make the other side of the island better. Our conversations were usually cryptic like that. That's what happens when two artists don't care to entertain each other. We were both concerned about our own muses, our own craft. We wouldn't even look in the other's direction. I was self-sufficient. I would tend to a small garden uphill and sometimes fish. I had my books and the sea and my lighthouse. I could sit for hours and just stare at it, just admire its beauty and elegance. Why did it have to ruin everything? The thing in the sea. I watched it every day as it crept up to the shore, inch after inch. One dreadful morning, I woke up and I couldn't spot it out the window anymore, which meant that it was too close for me to see. I had dreams of wet footsteps on the lighthouse stairs, of someone running up at me, of dirty hands reaching to pull me out of my home. One day, it finally washed up on the shore. It was there. It was real. And it was dead. I stared in disbelief at the bloated body in front of me. It looked both like something that had once been human and like something the sea had tried and failed to finish digesting. The skin had stretched tight in places and split in others, a pale waterlogged grey mottled with deep bruised purple, like rot blooming beneath the surface. In some areas it sat loose and wrinkled, slipping over the shape of the bones as if it no longer belonged there. Yet it had a certain composure that you didn't expect it to possess. I kicked it slightly with my shoe, the way a kid kicks a dead animal, to see if it could still move. Its clothes clung to its heavy, sodden layers, fused with the flesh. Seaweed had tangled itself around its limbs, thin strands threaded between stiff fingers, knotted at the joints like the ocean had tried to stitch it back together. Bits of sand and shell were embedded into the skin, especially along the face. I knew it looked familiar. I knew that. But I didn't actually realize why it had looked so familiar until I took a very good look at the face. It was the man that had rushed past me on my first day. The man that didn't bother to say goodbye. His eyes were gone. The sockets yawned open, hollow and dark, filled with brackish water and something that moved slightly when the body shifted with the tide. For a moment, I thought I saw something inside recoil from the light. That made me gag, and I stepped back. The smell of death and salt, overwhelming and nauseating could manage to yell. That wasn't gonna get me anywhere, I thought. So my chest erupted again with a more powerful yell. I emptied my lungs into it, dread blossoming in my throat as a crab crawled out of the eye socket and into the sand. Please, please, please. Its hands were curled inward, fingers stiff and clawed. The nails cracked down to the quick, packed with dark grit. One of the arms bent at an angle it shouldn't have, the joint softened, almost loose, as if the bones inside had started to give way. And when I tell you this, you have to believe me. There were footprints behind it, wet, uneven impressions in the sand, leading from the waterline to where it now lay, up the shore, toward the lighthouse. That moment leads to a succession of frames. The sea framed by the mountains in the distance, the sand and that abomination of a man with crab sockets. I turned back, another man running towards me. Questions. I'm suddenly walking uphill, away from it. I can only repeat a few words. Getting closer. It was in the sea. The shock washed away slowly, but my conscience was already polluted. I remembered the first time I'd seen the man floating in the distance, integrated perfectly into the clear horizon line, as if he was standing on the edge of the earth. How did he get there? So far. I hadn't seen a boat or anything. I hadn't seen him sail, and yet he'd crept up on me. I was angry at him for disturbing my peace. I was also deeply confused. It wouldn't let me sleep. I kept dreaming of wet footsteps reaching me. Some locals carried him away without giving me any answers. I begged them to tell me what is going on, the way a desperate patient wants to know why they're feeling this sense of impending doom. And they replied with the same stern looks the doctors would have when they're avoiding giving a deadly diagnosis. The nights after that were unbearable. I dream of things I couldn't even explain. You know the nightmares you have when you're a kid? The ones with shapes that unexplainably get bigger and bigger and seem to spill out of your head. The fever dreams that spiral out of your control. That was topped with paranoia and the sense that something watched me. I had the clock in my room, and at some point I smashed it to pieces because the ticking sounds it made were awfully, painfully similar to wet footsteps on the stone floor. After I smashed it, I felt bad. The wet footsteps were still audible in the night, and now I couldn't even mistake them for the clock. I'd wake up from time to time, desperate and fearless, open the door to the lighthouse and yell at the empty sea. it would respond calmly each and every time, reminding me that no one was around for miles and no one could hurt me. A comforting thought that would sweep over me. You're alone. Then, a darker one. You're alone. It's understood that Lottie's visit started calming me down. She noticed how restless I was and how eager I'd become to talk. I know she was way colder than me, but I think her empathy is what made her listen and respond gently to my desperate inquiries. Do you know who he was? Yeah, Odeon says he was some guy that went missing a while ago. Previous lighthouse keeper, maybe? I asked, half joking. Oh, no. He was just some drunk fisherman. He'd sometimes go into the lighthouse, yes, to the top, claiming he wanted a better look, whatever was behind the sea. I didn't think drunkards could be so poetic, to be honest. But how did he get so far away? I assumed he stole a boat. Oh, no, he swam. I saw him just at the edge of the horizon lot. That has to be miles away. The currents here are atrocious, and you expect me to believe... Listen, Eliza. She lowered her brush and turned to me completely. The horizon is sometimes miles away, but sometimes it can be even closer. The waters here are deep. Who knows what lurks out there? You know, you keep saying that. Just because you always repeat those words doesn't mean I understand them. She shook her head. You'd think I'm crazy. You're here all the time. You never talk to the others in the village. So you've never had to listen to what they have to say. Even the drunkards at the pub hide some truth in their stories. I'm not sure I understand either, but there's a reason why no one ever comes from this side of the sea, and it's not the currents. People either fly in or come sailing from the other side of the island. What do you mean? There's something out there that they're afraid of. You said it was a clear morning when you first saw him? The body? Yeah? And that he was floating right on the horizon line? Sort of. And you didn't see no mountains? Something coiled inside of me. A feeling of shame. It reminded me of the times my mother would catch me lying. No. It was true. I hadn't seen any mountains that day. But they say on a good day you can see the stones of rocky rain. So there were no clouds, no mountains either. What mountains just sink like that? I don't understand what you mean. Lottie turned her canvas towards me. Shades of blue and green overlap, some lines higher, some lower. Dates were scribbled in pencil next to some. At first, I painted the seascape. Then I gave up because it kept changing. I started tracking it. The shore is here. On the 12th, the Bountings were this close. 3 days later, they were gone. Then, they were almost imperceptible, and the distance between them and the shore was much larger. Maybe it's some optical illusion. I'm in charge of the lighthouse. It acts as a navigational aid that guides ships into harbors. The whole area can't be completely isolated. When was the last time you saw a ship? As a response to my silence, she continued. Maybe your lighthouse serves another purpose. You ever thought of that? I suddenly felt very lightheaded. I walked away uphill. Lottie's last words shot me in the back, an arrow of uncertainty that I carried all the way up to the lighthouse, afraid to pull it out of my flesh. You ever notice that sometimes the mountains gleam like scales? Like scales. Of course, mountains gleam. They sparkle in the distance. Look, Lottie and her cryptic assumptions. Like scales. Yeah, there's a huge snake in the sea. It circles the shore, and sometimes it's closer. Ugh. Shut up. That's not the type of thing you say to a lighthouse keeper in the middle of nowhere. You don't respond to their paranoia by making them even more paranoid. I would look at the last thing I scribbled into the journal. Something in the sea keeps getting closer, and I'd fear the new meanings of those words. I was angry at Lottie for even thinking of that. And what's worse, I knew she believed it too. She hadn't said those words to mess with my head. She was completely convinced that something was out there in the sea. Something so huge that it looked like mountains. I'll move on to the next two incidents. First came the storm. I'll tell you all about that, and then I'll tell you how Lottie died. The storm didn't come unexpectedly. I'd actually come to question the almost perfect weather I'd enjoyed since I moved here. And as the clouds darkened and hovered over the lighthouse, as the sea receded, taking the biggest of breaths, something in me trembled with tension, neither good nor bad, neither enthusiasm or fear. I climbed the bony white tower as thunder broke the sky in half. There was nothing calm about this, but a rhythm I struggled to keep up with. I guess you could assimilate it to walking side by side with someone taller and struggling to match your steps with theirs. I was always a little behind, a little out of breath. Then I heard the tiny drops shoot over my home. They travelled together and formed their own waves that conquered the salty ones biting the rocks. Water blended into water, and I eventually managed to fall asleep as the fight unfolded outside. The state I went to sleep in was a complete stranger to the state I woke up in. It wasn't the terrible thunder which resembled a low, hoarse wail that woke me up, but the change in pressure. The air had thickened, and my ears were now almost completely clogged, as if I were underwater. I stood up and went straight to a window. Outside, black. Must have been well after midnight, but the clock had been smashed to pieces, and the other one was all the way to the top of the lighthouse. The higher I went up the stairs, the more I could feel the tower swaying under the terrible wind. That thunder came again, painful, and on such a low frequency that it reverberated in my own ribcage and stomach. I was overcome by nausea as I climbed higher and higher. I looked up. I still had so much left to go, which was impossible. On my hands and knees, I finally reached the top. My head was spinning and my ears popped and clogged. A horrible pain shot up my sinuses as I crouched down and vomited on the floor. I finally stood up and looked out the glass. It was completely dark, completely black. Thunder came again and I waited for the lightning, but it never followed. For those who don't know, at the very top, the lighthouse narrowed into a glass dome structure, like a cage of windows wrapped around a powerful light. The large Fresnel lens rotated slowly, piercing the night. Anything that stood in front of it was completely visible, and anything that stood behind it was submerged in total darkness. I was standing in a glass cage above a black, endless sea, swaying gently, and that only accentuated my nausea. An immense feeling of panic swept over me, and I had a bad taste in my mouth. I needed to get out of there. I needed to get the hell out. My bloodshot eyes darted to the notebook, open on a desk. There's always a bigger thing. I need you to understand how clogged my senses were at that moment. I was incredibly sick and confused because my eyes kept following the ray of light that was rotating, and yet I couldn't see anything. The moment it left the glass, it was completely absorbed. There was nothing outside the dome but complete and utter blackness. Usually, at night, the beam would rotate indifferently and carve the world into brief existence, then erase it again. See blackness, see blackness. That night, it was just blackness. No sea. I started feeling claustrophobic. The storm outside was so bad it had poured all of its rage onto my home and isolated me from any ounce of familiarity. I just needed to see the sky, the trees in the distance, the rocks, anything to help me anchor myself onto solid ground. For all I knew, and judging on the irritating swaying, the lighthouse could have been floating miles away. Panic built into my chest and overflowed in another round of puking. My visual field started to narrow, and I slapped myself a few times. Don't think. You're not floating miles away from the shore. You're anchored into the fucking rocks. There's nobody pulling you out. There was this excruciating pressure on the brain, and I suddenly feared that if lightning struck at that moment, I would surely die. It took me a long time to adjust my eyes to the darkness outside, immune to the rain. As I said, my senses were terribly clogged. I should have noticed it sooner. A strange thing about the uncanny is how easily it fools you, even when you're inches away from it. How easily you mistake something black for blackness. The darkness was not complete. Holding onto the desk and afraid to step closer to the glass, it all clicked into place. Something was obstructing the beam, vast and incomprehensible. The mist, the rain blurred everything together, but as the light completed another rotation, I realized it would slightly reflect into something, tracing the surface of something that had risen to meet it. Something so large that the room I stood in was nothing more than a point brushing against its skin. That was the reason why the tower was swaying, the reason for the pressure that drove me crazy. Something leaned, coiled around the lighthouse. I studied the point where the light crashed with the blackness, and I swear I could barely make out the outline of a huge scale, almost as big as the lantern, followed by another. The third time I vomited was the most violent. My whole body started convulsing and I fell to the floor, my shoulder hitting the ground, followed by my head. The image of the enormous and hostile scale was the last thing I saw before it came into nothingness. There are many ways I could have died that night. Choking on my own vomit, fainting down the stairs. In a way, I think I did die, because when I woke up, it felt like a resurrection. I spit my stomach out for the fourth time as my shoulder moved sharply in the wrong direction. Pain blinded me as much as the morning light. The morning light. I could see the sky outside. Whatever bad dream I'd have of something coiling around the lighthouse was gone and forgotten. I forgave my consciousness for pulling that atrocity out of the depths of my head, and I crawled down the stairs, washed myself, and tried to tend to my shoulder in the best ways I could. After I cleaned up my vomit, I limped outside and inhaled the salty air hungrily. I'd survived that nightmare. I looked back to the white structure, and there, caught in the drying salt, were faint impressions, ridges, smears. My knees gave up. As they hit the sand, a voice hollered behind me. Eliza, Lottie, what the hell are you doing here? Liza, I can't believe you're alive. She grabbed my shoulders, which pulled out a scream that's hiding behind my lungs. Don't. Oh, I think I dislocated my shoulder. I fainted last night. She took a good look at me, then raised her head and studied the gleaming giant. Her eyes scanned the horizon next, clear and impossibly far. was no ordinary storm. She'd tell me I had some nightmare about a serpent coiling around the lighthouse. That was no nightmare. Have you seen the dents in the sand? The dents in the railing? I can see them from down here. Shut up. I'm tired, Lottie. My words melted into tears. I'm tired of you bullshitting me. I'm really scared and alone up there, and I can't have you claiming that some snake that's so big it gets mistaken for mountains in the distance is now small enough to coil around my tower. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. You can't possibly believe you saw the whole thing up close. It was a section of it. Besides, it can vary in thickness. I just don't understand why it comes so close. Why it would wrap a part of itself around the lighthouse. Just stop talking. My head hurt horribly. Eliza, her tone had shifted now. It made me look up. I'm asking you to stop being so blinded by whatever fantasy you have of living here. I noticed you call it your lighthouse. It's not yours. This place doesn't belong to you. For God's sake. You need to observe the world around you and accept it as it is. Be receptive to what it gives you, so you can learn how to protect yourself. I don't believe in your sniff. I'm surprised you didn't die. How did you even come to the conclusion it was a snake, huh? I stood up from the sand. Are you always this intuitive, Lottie? Is that why you chose to isolate yourself then? So you can create your own monsters and be in touch with the divine. What are you, 25? Why stay here? Why dream of sea serpents and receding horizons? I could ask you the same thing. I'm only trying to save you. No, you're just feeding into this dark fantasy you have of making your life more meaningful than it actually is. For all I know, you could have actually died, Liza. What the hell are you waiting for? We've seen everything, and you keep sleeping next to it. Are you gonna wait until you're staring down its enormous reptile mouth? Shut up. Just shut up. You know what I think really happened? Her eyes gained a subtle composure, the way an opponent looks at you before winning a chess match. I think it was sizing you up. My throat went dry. I watched her as she turned her back to me and confidently crossed the distance between me and the path through the woods until it was just me and the sea. Now that I thought more about it, I realized that I'd never noticed how similar the sounds of the waves were to harsh breathing. I walked after her. I was going to reach the village and talk to someone else. Someone as rational as I was. Someone that would maybe give me some pills. There wasn't much to see on the other side of the island. A few bored fishermen and drunkards. No young people. I found the only diner, and the first thing I asked face to face with the hostess was why I was sent there. She instantly knew who I was. Why wouldn't she? I was the only young face apart from Lottie who lived on the island. The closest in age to us was Odeon, her son who served as the island's doctor. The old lady didn't talk much, and the locals avoided my gaze. They were all weirdly protective of Lottie and asked me to leave, as if I was some evil presence they wanted to get rid of. On my way out, I ran into Odeon and asked if he knew anything. He said he didn't know, but that tales like mine were as old and well known around the place. He did know whoever lived there before wrote some letters to his wife that I could probably read. I asked what happened to the previous lighthouse keeper, and Odeon shrugged. I asked why the letters were still there, and he said that he guessed that nobody actually bothered to send the letters to his wife. Everyone there was too afraid to set foot in the lighthouse. I looked back at all those cowards and then started marching towards the tower, determined to understand what the hell I'd gotten into. The man had disappeared, and no one checked on his relatives. Why had no one come to look for him? Letters were a generous word. I found a bunch of notes titled "To Samara" under my mattress. Most of them made no sense or were simply too mundane to be reproduced here. Something, however, caught my attention. A letter dated February 5th caught my eye, as it repeated something I'd thought many times. Something in the sea keeps getting closer. Dusk settled over the lighthouse, and I remained sitting on the floor, crouched and tense as I read the next passages. 30th of February 2002. The mountains sank into the sea. Odeon is a young doctor. His eyes move around a lot. 17th February 2002. That is a serpent. A serpent is circling the island, and it shall swallow us whole one day. We are at the very end of the world, and the atrocity of the abyss spills upwards from the emptiness. 2nd of March 2002. There is no such thing as the end of the world. 3rd of March 2002. The serpent is just a mere messenger. We have to leave. The lighthouse is just a marker for where humanity stops. The sea is sentient. It knows. It does not care. Do you see how carefully it handles the boat? Even the sea is afraid of the serpent. You'll see. Sail away and you fall off. The sea tends to its sores like a hurt child. It wails at night and tears the sand away in the morning. Don't you hear it? See? We are just a bubble of life in the monster sea, in the sea foam, in the salty abyss of the ocean and the whole civilization sunk by the serpent. The serpent always watches, but even the serpent is afraid of the mouth. The end of the world is a mouth. The sea spills into it, a hungry mouth. I need to keep sailing. I need to reach the end. If it swallows me, so be it. I need to reach the end. Why does it continue on trying to get me out? I hadn't meant for Lottie to discover the notes. She never came into the lighthouse. She never invaded my space. But that morning, She was restless. She had been hit by a sudden push of optimism, and she had brought me something from the diner that day, but I wasn't home. I was tending to my garden up the hill, and by the time I came back, I found her on the floor, pieces of paper scattered around her. She looked lost. Hey, Lottie, did you, bring me something? I told you I wasn't crazy. I didn't call you crazy. You said I was wasting my life. You can be so dense sometimes. I paused. I feared that anything I said could have been used against me. I think that's the only moment in my life I have ever truly regretted. The only moment when I couldn't play my cards right. I think that's when I lost her. I took a deep breath. Maybe we should just leave. The island, I mean. This place. What? Now you want to leave this place? You mean the end of the world? It's not, I began. Then my voice died. I'm not stupid. I know that Earth is not flat, but I sure as hell don't believe it just keeps going further away from the snake. I just think we should leave. Sail away. I have nowhere to go. If you were right, Eliza, I have no one to go back to. I never said that. What did he mean? What did he mean by the hungry mouth? Do you think this is what happens? The edge craves a soul from time to time to keep it from moving closer to the shore. Of course not. The drunkard, the previous keeper, they were the ones that noticed it first. I noticed it before you did. So what? You're here, right? It's not like some giant hand will emerge from the clouds and take you. I could tell she wasn't fully listening. I comfort myself by thinking that even if I had physically pulled her away from that island, she would have spent the rest of her days dreaming of that corner of the sea where it just stops. I could see the longing in her eyes, her lips craving the taste of salt and iron. Maybe I'm already there. You're not. You're with me, here. You fear death. Only if it doesn't give your life meaning. This, Eliza, would immortalize me. There is a certain longing for death that only artists possess. What is it about it that makes it so desirable? I didn't see her leave. I knew she was gone for good when the anger erupted inside of me. One morning, I woke up and I was angry. I was livid. Something was pulsing in my chest. When Lottie died, I gained another heart. The blood it gave me was boiling and hungry for answers. Lottie was right. We had no one to return to at home. Yeah, I had a sister, but we were estranged and didn't care for one another. I lived another 4 or 5 days on that beach, keeping that lighthouse alive. It helped no one, obviously. Not one soul sailed across the body of the serpent. I had all kinds of dreams. Another storm hit me, But this time the serpent did not make any appearance. I barely saw it in the distance, emerging from the dark waves. I knew why. Lottie's death had sustained the horizon for now, and it didn't need any soul, which meant that it wouldn't take any sacrifice in vain, which meant that I had a very tiny window of opportunity to sail away and see the mouth with my own eyes, and if my intuition was correct, I would be spared. I dragged the wooden boat down the rocky beach, the stones grinding like bones beneath the hull, the water usually violently churning with the creature's massive undertow, lay unnaturally flat. It looked thick, like bruised oil, reflecting a sky that had long forgotten the sun. I pushed off, the cold water soaking my boots, and climbed in. It wasn't necessarily peaceful or calm, and I began to wonder if it had ever actually been serene, or if I just imagined it. There was no calm before the storm, because what awaited me was not a storm, and if I was correct, it could just be nothing. Panting, my arms trembling from the effort, since I barely remembered the last time I had lifted something up, and now I was fighting with the dark water. I paused and let the oars rest. I looked back over my shoulder, seeking one last glimpse of comfort from the shore. From the land, the lighthouse had always been a stoic guardian of pink brick and warm yellow glass, a beacon of sanity against the dark. I'd remarked its beauty from the first day I arrived, its newness and wisdom towering over me and guiding me, and the many ships I imagined would come, but never did. But out here, unmoored from the shore and floating in the serpent's domain, the veil rocked, and I saw it for what it truly was. It wasn't a building at all. It was a jagged, towering obelisk of dead, like swallowing stone. A cruel, monolithic spike driven deep into the bedrock of the island, as if to physically pin the dying earth in place, to pin me in place. There was nothing human about the architecture, nothing comforting and intuitive. The guiding light was alive. At the apex of the spire, hovering completely detached from the stone, was a shifting geometric cage of rusted iron. Inside it burned a harsh, sulphurous glare that didn't illuminate, but rather stained everything it touched with a sickly bruised yellow. It looked exactly like the fleshy lure of a deep-sea anglerfish, dangled over the continent to keep the terrified remnants of humanity huddled in its false warmth. It hadn't been keeping the dark at bay. It was a warden, a parasite feeding on our ignorance, designed to keep us docile, grounded, and utterly terrified of venturing out to find the truth. I had spent days feeding fuel into that towering monument of control, prisoner faithfully polishing the bars of his own cell. Well, now the illusion was shattered. I was going to find out the truth. Maybe the only human ever to try to do so. I rode until my palms blistered and bled, leaving the useless, flickering eye of the lighthouse behind. As I pushed further into the deep, the nature of the ocean began to warp. The water lost its transparency, turning into viscous, ink-black sludge. It was utterly opaque, a crushing, bottomless void right beneath the half-inch wood of my boat. Looking down gave me severe vertigo, and my mind couldn't fathom the miles of suffocating, lightless pressure suspended directly beneath me. The sea was unnaturally silent, deadened and thick, swallowing the sound of my oars. I don't even know how far I sailed. Time seemed to bend and warp around me, and I couldn't imagine how the drunkard had managed to swim through all this polluted emptiness. I feared that the sea bottom had become the earth's very core, or worse. I didn't want to stare too much, dreading the moment I'd find myself looking into the sky of something entirely different, a stranger to all man-trapped horrors. There's always a bigger fish. Then the water began to dough. It didn't form a wave. The entire surface of the ocean ahead of me simply bulged upward, rising dozens of feet into the air like a blister on the skin of the world. A shadow grew beneath the black water. At first, I thought it was a reef, but it kept expanding until it consumed the entire visible expanse of the sea. It was a mass so incomprehensibly colossal that my brain tried to project the sight of it. The serpent surface. It didn't breach like the wave. It emerged with agonizing slowness, a geological event rather than a biological one. A single scale broke through the surface. It was bigger than what I'd seen in the lighthouse, and I suddenly regretted that I could see it in the light of day and not blend into the darkness. The size of a house, jagged and grey, encrusted with pale, writhing deep-sea polyps and barnacles. The displacement of water created a silent, massive swell that caught my boat, lifting me hundreds of feet into the air as the creature's spine became an impossible mountain range, parting the ocean. I was paralyzed, a microscopic speck of dust floating beside a living tectonic plate. The sheer, suffocating mass of the thing warped the air around it. I could feel its heartbeat, a rhythmic earthquake that rattled my teeth and made my lungs spasm, but a heartbeat no different from mine. There is always a bigger fish. If this was the serpent, how big was the mouth it was guarding? It was guiding me. The current generated by its endless gliding bolt trapped my boat in a channel of rushing water running parallel to its flank. I didn't need to row anymore. I was being pulled along the tail of the beast at terrifying speed. I looked ahead, trying to see its head, but its body just stretched on until it vanished into the mist. It was too big to look at all at once. It made the sky feel small. It made me feel like I didn't exist at all. Hours, or maybe minutes, as time seemed crushed by the creature's gravity. Then I heard it. A continuous, tearing hum that escalated into a deafening, catastrophic roar. The sound of an entire ocean pouring into nothing. It was so similar to the thunder I had heard during the storm. The mist ahead shredded violently, sucked forward by a colossal downdraft. The horizon wasn't a line. It was a sheer, terrifying drop. The water simply stopped, bending downward into a gorge of empty space, so vast it swallowed the mind. And there, draped casually over the edge of the world, was the front of the serpent, its neck extended over the precipice, plunging straight down into the abyss. As my boat was dragged toward the rock, the creature shifted, turning its head slightly. Its eye was a pale, dead moon suspended in the mist. It was staring not at me, but at whatever lay down in the void. This was the mouth of the abyss. The scale of the drop, the monolithic horror of the beast, the impossible geometries of the edge were a truth the human mind was not built to contain. I leaned forward, my eyes wide, desperate to consume the absolute finality of it all. I was going to finally see what the serpent saw, to finally understand what no living person could. As it pulled me toward the edge, I prepared for the drop. I felt incredibly light. Would I drown? Would I suffocate? Or just pulverize into it? Would the mouth swallow me? Could I catch a glimpse of the giant first? The face that smiles up at us from the edge of the earth, would it be God? Why would God smile up at us and not down on us? It was incredibly close, the drop. As I leaned forward, desperate to look, to see, my visual field narrowed and a terrible heaviness consumed me. I don't know what happened after that. Silence. No, that wouldn't even be right. It wasn't silence, because I was not there to acknowledge it. And silence is a human concept. It was just an absence. I was absent for a great time, and I feel like I simply did not exist. A whisper broke into my non-existence and brought me back to life. That's when the smell of salt rushed in and the sand invaded my lungs at last, and the stinging came into my being, burning and hungry as I coughed and spat out every fragment of death that I had in me. A hand pounded into my back as if it was trying to send my heart flying through my chest. I spat and spat and spat, and the voice demanded that I live. I heard it loud and clear, as cold as my heavy soaked robes. I responded with a hoarse whisper. I don't remember what I was trying to say, and I let it yell at me a little more, the way a child lets its mother put them into place. My hands were desperately grabbing the sand, and I crawled into the sea. But another pair of hands, stronger, more determined, more desperate and scared than I was, pulled me back. Hey, are you okay? Hey, hey. I was fading in and out of consciousness, the voice pulling me back up, and the silence pushing me back into the abyss. I coughed again. I was exhausted. I fell into the sand, my hands and cheeks burning and lungs. When I finally calmed down, I realized that the avalanche of sensations I'd felt before had existed around a gaping hole in my being. Something was missing. Where? Oh, it's Odeon. Hey, how far did you manage to sail? Hey! Something was missing. Hey, can you see me? Can you see me? Do, look at me. I couldn't obey. When the shock washed over me, as the hands pulled me upwards and dragged me towards some unknown place, as someone covered me up with a blanket, the realization dawned on me. They asked me 1,000,000,000 questions, and I only had one answer. I don't know. How did you go blind? I don't know. How far did you manage to sail? I don't know. What was out there? I don't know. I couldn't do my job anymore, as you can probably imagine. Not that it was a very important job anyway. It was hands that pulled me out of the water, and hands that shoved me back into it, into a boat that sent me away in the opposite direction of the mouth. I left from the other side of the island. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Once upon a time, I was the keeper of a small island, holding itself onto a hook at the edge of the abyss. The lighthouse I lived in was the tooth of the giant, and I spent my days staring into its mouth. I wish I could say that I have seen the end of the world, but I never had the chance to do that. The end of the world was not mine to see. It took me days to get back home. I needed Odeon to accompany me, to assist me as I travelled back to my flat. The sound of the city broke in hastily and impatiently, devouring any ounce of silence or peace that I had before. I do miss the lighthouse dearly for what it gave to me. If you ever get the chance to travel there, please write to me. I couldn't see the end of the world for myself, and that troubles me deeply. But maybe you can. Maybe you can tell me what lies into the giant's mouth. Maybe it will show itself to you. Please go and try. I need to know what is out there. Odeon is writing this, and I am dictating. He says I should find a way to end this. It was his request to tell the story. Even as a writer, I am at a loss of words at the moment. My name is Eliza Frenner. This is the story of how I went missing for 5 years and how I came back. This is the story of how I went blind. I have to admit, at night, when I am laying in my bed, the waves come crashing in, and I wonder if I really left the island. I've lost my sight, and the last thing I saw was the sea and edge of the abyss. Or it might have been lucky. I'm not sure. My journey back home was a mixture of voices and sharp turns. But I never actually saw the bed that I'm laying in now. Which makes me wonder if I ever truly left. Maybe I'm still there, floating away. Maybe I've been swallowed whole, and I'm just dreaming now. I wouldn't know. I can't tell the darkness from the light anymore. It has come time that we, the people of Maplewood Point, break free from the grip of esotericism. Our lives have been under the control of the High Court for far too long. Our culture has been banished by the archaic laws. Our very existence is threatened by their supremacy. We demand a form of government that respects our natural rights. We demand a sophisticated system of secular ethics that supports our freedom to live and die as we see fit. Let this day be known as the beginning of the rebellion. They may strip us of our will, deprive us of our means, but they will never have our dignity. This ends here. The dawn of our freedom was a strange, uncomfortable day. We ripped off our bandages as a society and confronted that which plagued us for so long. The fabric of our social lives were controlled by a cult of suppression. They spoke for the High Court, a group of gods like all other gods, man-made, fictitious. As far as we know, this group holds immense power over all major nations. The free world is only truly free if you worship their perfect order. We live now in city-states, territories connected to empires, strung together by their theological doctrine. I can't speak for a nation. I can't even speak for a district. But I can speak for the town I was born and raised in. I can speak for its people because I am their struggles and their voices bleed through me. We reject the High Court. Maplewood Point, in all of its coastal beauty and its sovereignty, has had enough. We did what had to be done on the day of liberation. It was gritty, unpleasant, but what felt like a break from decorum was only us asking nicely first. If I were to ask a would-be intruder to politely flee the premises, the interloper would likely take advantage of my charitability. We would have been philosophically enslaved by their dogmatic notions, but on the 12th of August, we vowed never to be victims. So we threatened them with death. We got rid of their talking heads, banished their scholars. Sympathizers faced assimilation or exile, and those that directly opposed our orders were put to the sword. We had our weapons drawn on a high court priest when the man started begging for compromise. Our oppressor suddenly wanted to barter for his life. We offered no refuge, and we gave him no purchase, for if he were entitled to an inch, he was certain to take a mile. He did have a rather hilarious warning before his departure into exile. He foretold the coming of death upon our soil, how we would no longer yield our crops, and how our population would starve. To end on a strong gesture, he also said that we would all be slaves once judgment is carried out. Men like him are not prophets. They are ornaments for false gods. Needless to say, we took his word for little more than grains of salt. He wandered off to a hazy skyline, never to be seen again with the rest of his defeated cultists. It was the right thing for my people. We were a group who protected our own interests. We were not subservient to religious principles, and our people were waking up as we carried out this exodus. For years, we succumbed to an undercurrent of hopelessness. We all thought life would never be the same after we watched their empire open its maw, revealing its ideological teeth to the world. As far as we knew, we were becoming the loneliest isle of free thought in the world. There has been no such news to suggest that other city-states were plotting rebellions against their missionaries, but the task of paving a new road is not an argument against straying from the flock. If liberty requires the unthinkable undertaking, then that is what the cost must be to maintain an ideal constitution. I would also like to address our actions to whomever may be hearing this. You may think us to be cruel. You may even make the case that in some ways we are worse for our propensity to violence in our revolution. But you have not known silence like the people of Maplewood have. You have not known our enduring struggle against the forces that governed us. In order to place yourself in the shoes of my people, you must first try to imagine every public execution you didn't witness. Those were our brothers and sisters, not yours. You don't know how much we lost. Now that the growing pains are out of the way, I should tell you, dear listeners, that if any of you share our ambitions, we encourage you not to suffer in silence. Take back your rights from their artificially crafted destiny. Reclaim your will. Rip your birthright from their gnarled fingers. There lies a massive target on our backs, but this is often what must be paid in order for ideals to stand on their own. Life was calm after we expelled the regime. Our people felt comfortable moving around in their own neighborhoods. We had conversations about what we had gone through and how we would move through it together as a tightly knit union. We hugged our loved ones closer than ever before, and we armed ourselves so that this could never happen again. I was one of the unlucky ones in all of this. I was left with a fractured home as the monarchs of my family tree fought over who had a right to exist. They clashed along philosophical lines over who had the right to freely express their beliefs. We advocated for a society that would tolerate the religion, ethics, and expression of anyone that offered them, even if we ourselves could not believe in it. The cult and their ravenous followers presupposed that their way was the baseline for all ways. In their speeches, they would treat our entire framework like it was only made possible by their incoherent worldview. So while the rest of us saw violence in the streets, violence in our institutions, I encountered it at each waking moment in the place that raised me. Their punishments were horrible. I shudder to even recount them as I tell this. They would break into the homes of innocent people with ghastly masks and flay them alive if they disrespected the tenets of the High Court. They would hang my childhood friends for cursing their gods. I was one in a dwindling group of people that learned to hold our tongues. As soon as we emerged on the other side of revolution, and I suddenly had the liberty to say what I wanted to say, I ran out of words before I even opened my mouth. It was a sensation that could bring tears to your eyes. I remember weeping at such a generational relief with my friends who had endured the weight of their captivity. I repeated truths I'd only ever spoken in imaginary conversations. Every dream I'd ever had of the old world felt like it was coming back to me in the waking realm. Though we were driven into vigilance, conditioned into military dominance, we felt at last that we were whole. Time dragged itself forth as it always had, and as the noise from our revolution died down into content peace, we came to realize something odd. Since we had become the sole voice of secular reason, we were quietly anticipating for the rest of the world to bare their arms and go to war with us. Could you imagine it? The horizons from north to south, the seas from east to west, all descending upon us with bloodthirsty indignation. We went 5 years without so much as a peep from the enemy in the greater regions. I can recall with precise detail the day that soured our aspirations for peace. I sat with my friend James, who was one of our loudest voices in the revolution. The sky was characterized by a mindless blanket of blue, and we watched the endlessly rolling seas in contemplation. Do you ever wish we could go back to blissful ignorance? He thought for a moment before replying. You and I are who we are today because of the things we had to survive through. As much as I have nightmares about it, we may be better off for having lived through that hell. I know it can be a curse, but how are you taking it? I don't really know what to think. I guess more than anything, the silence of the Empire worries me more than if they had pushed back. What do you mean? We forcibly expelled the cultists and all of their poison, but the other city-states didn't send their armies. They didn't come marching over demanding us to conform. They didn't slaughter us when it would have been easy and justifiable for them to do so. Well, we've been ready for that possibility since the day we rose up. Whether or not they will or won't is irrelevant. We finally had the life we deserve. I understand that the possibility troubles you, but we will never be in chains again. You might be right. I can't shake the feeling that something else is coming. Something dire. If such a day comes, we will live as slaves once more or die free. There is little room in my mind for uncertainty, but I can assure you that I will spare no effort in keeping us safe. James was the voice of our struggles for years. During the initial expulsion, he would strengthen our morale by occasionally cracking jokes. It takes time to personally speak to each of us, to comfort our woes in that upheaval. After the violence came to an end, our people wanted to elect him as our leader, but he politely declined. I always admired him for his dedication and bravery. On my own, I was scared, but with his companionship, I felt I could move mountains. Just as I was beginning to brush aside my concerns, something unusual occurred that night. While most of us were soundly asleep, there were reports of somebody standing completely still by the beach, not walking around or simply gazing off to the horizon. The man was staring directly up at the clouded sky, twitching slightly every few minutes according to a key eyewitness. It wasn't unusual for some of us to go on late night walks when we couldn't sleep, but it was unusual for someone to bear that demeanor, to linger like a scarecrow at our shores, and to feign lifelessness in such a way. That would have been the strangest part if it wasn't for his family, who claimed that he hadn't left his room all night. They'd have no reason to lie, right? What was even the point? That instance in itself could have been written off somehow. I didn't know how. Maybe that person was under the influence of something that didn't want his parents to know. That didn't bother me so much as the conversation around it did. Instead of having fear brushed out of my mind, the people of Maplewood Point made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. And I'm not talking about the fear of armies and guns and swords. It was a layer of primal unease for whatever could have been worse than more violence. The gossip was incessant, lingering like dust I could have sworn I already cleaned from an old bookshelf. I clung desperately to the peace I'd lived with for so long by then. We had our revolution. Surely we could rest, right? But no one would hold their tongue. Their speculation caught sparks, which blossomed into social wildfires. Whispers about people not being who they said they were. Hushed tales about strangers having two simultaneous alibis. Dreaded omens about false faces. Some of their mothers wept. The close-knit pairs of lonely souls were rent into painful angst. Star-crossed lovers began to wonder if they could truly trust one another. I was but a single lightning bug fleeing the embers, receding into quieter spaces, perhaps lonely, but it felt like a pocket of certainty in a growing blaze of paranoia. James was nowhere to be found among all of this. He didn't rally our people as he would have all those moons ago. I had his number and occasionally checked in with him to make sure he was doing all right mentally. Needless to say, his silence worried me, but I figured he was just about sick of the noise too. Perhaps he needed room to breathe. In the meantime, more community posts stacked on top of each other, all seemingly echoing the dire sentiment that something was changing. No one can say what it was for sure, but it was like something had intercepted all of our natural instincts. Everyone at once had felt detached, severed emotionally from what made them feel human. It was a soul-sucking void thought that wormed its way into nightmares that we all suffered. The clearest image I can ascribe it is in the scene of a dark forest. All of the insects and scuttling critters move in harmony in the trees and the bush until a predator looms nearby, bringing everything to uncomfortable uncomfortable silence. I think that we were the woods, and that whatever was happening was something wicked. This led down a speculative train of thought into everything I thought I knew. I believed in no God, but I had to consider the possibility that possibly it was some kind of retribution for the things we did and the lack of remorse in the aftermath. But why should we have spared an inkling of sympathy for the ones that tried to break us? Why should my despair for them have exceeded their despair for my family? No, I refuse to believe that any God would strike us down purely for wanting to be free. But I couldn't deny that the fear was different from that of war. No battle formations on the hills, and I recall something that the old priest said 5 years prior. Just before he wandered off to the horizon, he warned of an incoming judgment, death on our soil and the enslavement of our men, women, and children. Could it all have been true? I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I started to question the existence of malevolent deities. The High Court, a judicial collective of greater creatures. I decided to research what I could of their religion's holy text. In the uprising, we banned most of it, but remnants still existed. Hundreds of documents were scattered across neglected corners of our library, and as I pieced the larger image together, I feared that we were up against something much more barbaric than anything we'd been accused of. I read a prophecy, an army of beings that would wear our flesh and destabilize the people of a lower world. They would invade the lives of millions and drive their populations to extinction so that their believers could flourish. In death, the souls of the displaced civilization were taken to an empire of warped glass, where they would remain in disjointed silence for all of eternity. If we were in danger, I had to say something to my people, even if I wasn't entirely sure what I was warning them of. I didn't feel sound of mind telling everyone that we were bound to be victims of prophecy. The best I could do was facilitate the voice of reason. I could only hope that my guidance would keep our dreams alive. On a humdrum, overcast day, I called everyone I could to meet me at the plaza at noon. With little more than old boxes and pieces of scrap, I stood upon a makeshift podium to deliver my message. It has become apparent to me that in this new age, cracks are forming along our social fault lines. You are all growing with every day to distrust each other. Instead of rejoicing, our lives have been slowly corroding into a deepening tribulation between our own friends and families. The people exchanged glances before fixing their gazes sharply back on me. When we banished our enemy just over 5 years ago to this day, one could have expected retaliation. No? Why? If we are the only district of free speech, were we not besieged by their overwhelming numbers? If the cult claims to be descendants of a wrathful god, why are we not subject to that strain of hate? I threw up my arms, begging for anyone to give me an answer. None of you can tell me, and I think there's a reason for that. I recognize that what we are saying goes against all that we know. But I believe that we need not wage an easy war with us, because something else is descending upon us altogether. A few members of the audience scoffed. Others shook their heads. One man even began to walk away slowly into the noise of our society. I felt somehow that I should have recognized him, but his face was hard to entirely make out. I won't claim to know all of what's happening, but I do know one thing for sure. Do not leave your homes at night. I won't even limit your daily travels. Something else is going on. After what we have all endured, I can't bear to see any more bloodshed. Please, even if you don't believe me, be careful. We have so much to live for. As they all started to wander off, I wondered if I could at all change the course of our fate. I debated with myself whether or not my words would be enough to save them. Would the blood be on my hands if they didn't heed my words? I wouldn't be afforded the answer, but the rising wave of disorder was still building. Most people knew better than to disregard my warning, but others? I could not tell if they were deaf to my pleas, or if they had already been replaced. If I was right, and it was all a plot for us to pay our penance, that would certainly mean that they could have already been among us. But for how long? Why wait years to break us apart? How long had they been walking among the rest of the population, and why wouldn't they just strike us down when they had the chance? I could not turn a blind eye to the unsettling notion that we were already being infiltrated. In all fairness, it was a good plan. Slowly replace our people so that by the time the rest of us notice, it'll already be too late. I'd start seeing people stare at each other without saying anything for an unnatural amount of time. Sometimes I'd spot a face peeking out at me from around a random corner. My own neighbours were acting strangely as well. At odd hours of the night, I would hear doors opening and slamming shut. Footsteps slowly wandering around the surrounding bush, trying and failing to be silent on the wind. But I always caught them, peered out of my window to see them wander back off into the night. A mental barrier was broken when they started wandering closer to my home. I lamented the fact that I could no longer trust the people I once joined in liberation. I didn't have any firearms in my house, so I settled on clutching a kitchen knife close to my person when dusk fell. I would leap from my bed at times as they would try to open windows like they thought I wouldn't lock them. They would try the doorknob after pretending like they knew me personally. They would disguise themselves with words a friend might say, as if I'd ever spoken a word to them. They couldn't fool me. I'd look through the people, and I could see that they were all strangers to me. I still had to wonder where the hell James could have been in all of this. His silence was uncharacteristic for the revolutionary soul I'd always known him to be. The man I called my friend would never stand for it. He still wasn't answering any of my texts or calls, so I decided out of concern for his well-being that I would go to his house amid daylight. Upon knocking on his door, I was initially met with no answer. "James, you're really starting to worry me. It's turning into chaos out here and we need you." I pushed my ear against it to see if maybe I could make out any noise coming from within. Without warning, the door swung open to reveal his mother standing there. "Oh, hi, Mrs. I don't think James wants to see you right now, dear. He's not been feeling well. You might want to come back another day." "Ma'am, I don't mean to intrude, but this is urgent. Can I please see him for at least a moment?" "I'd prefer if you didn't. He really needs to rest." The longer we spoke by the door, the more I noticed something off with her countenance. It didn't feel like the warm, sweet woman I'd known as a neighbor for all my childhood. She felt cold where she stood, unbudging in this hostile, defensive position. The look in her eyes felt an ancient visage, trying to masquerade as something modern. "All right, well, I guess I'll leave you be. Tell him I said hello." That encounter alone settled it for me. Before I even rounded the corner, I pulled out my phone and sent messages to everyone I could think of. "They're here. Don't go outside. They're already here." I didn't bother to mask my urge to break out into a mad dash back to my house. I was certain that I was already being watched, let alone followed by one of them. It's such a crazy feeling to have your skepticism obliterated by the ineffable. I didn't know what to think of what I saw in his mother's eyes, but that couldn't have been the person I knew. It just couldn't have. My lungs failed to give me enough oxygen as I sprinted back, tears starting to alter my vision. All we knew stood to die. All I had left was on the precipice of destruction. My life about to be plunged into new bounds of despair. And what of James? What the hell was going on? Why couldn't anybody answer me? Were they all taken before my eyes? The moment my house came into view, I nearly tripped over my frenzy. My jaw hung agape. Bullets of sweat ran down my forehead. The lights were on and shadows were dancing on the wall. There were beings that almost looked like people, throwing around furniture and tearing apart my bedroom, looking for me. They have loose skin and fingers like curled daggers. I couldn't bear to believe what I was seeing. The shape shifters. They're all real. I finally found motion in my legs again and decided to at least attempt an escape. I wasn't sure where I was headed or even what I was supposed to do. I doubted I could save anyone from the glaring reality we were facing, and to think we were the last bastion of free will. What was it all for? What was left of the new world? What would happen to us? I raced past the horror as it descended with the weight of the gods upon my home. I heard the screams of innocent souls being mauled by the number of their ghastly wrecks. I watched the tears streaming down my face as they burned down my city. More of them fell from the sky with wings that retracted into their skin as if they were made of gelatinous substance. They mercilessly absorbed everyone I knew. My world was spinning with absolute terror. My legs were on the verge of collapsing, and my heart almost hurt with its booming palpitations reverberating in my ears. The sensation swirled into a mind-numbing cacophony of noise until I felt something sharp plunge into my back. My body slammed against the pavement as the maelstrom of noise exploded with agony. Blood pooled around my hands as I tried to scramble, turn around to witness the beast that struck me down. But what stood before me was worse than their soulless maws. My gaze met the silhouette of James. What the hell is this? Shh, shh. Calm down, my child. Everything will be as it should. You will frolic in a large garden. All your friends will be there. You can run around with your kin forever. No, what have you done with James? He is one with the souls in the garden. You will join him too in time. You will meet him in the greater empire. Why do we deserve this? Because it would have been far more lenient to enslave you. Don't you want to pick flowers with James? Forever? Isn't that a beautiful dream? We just wanted to be free. You can be free in the empire of warped glass. You should rejoice in the gift of the new dream. You should rest now, my child. Rest. I lay now in a river of my own blood as it stains the road, glaring in a fading defiance against the stolen shape of my friend. It's too late for recourse. This is the end of my path. This is the end of Maplewood Point. And as I drift in whatever comes after this, I recoil in alarm. For if the High Court has truly sent this army of interlopers, what will I be greeted with in the long dream of death? And perhaps more bothersome, how long did we have until there was no going back? I think back to that day James and I sat on that bench, and I wonder, as I try to breathe through the case of viscous iron, was he real when he spoke to me? How long did it take for our dream to die?